Hey everyone, welcome to my webinar. My name is Dean Ray and I'm a coach here at the SalesGym. I've worked with thousands of salespeople over the years, and one of the most common questions I get is how do you overcome objections at the end of a sales call? And while this is a fair question, and there are some techniques to overcome objections at the end, the real answer is that by conducting good discovery and gaining shared agreement on what the facts are, you can often avoid having to overcome any objections at the end by gaining that agreement early. So today we're going to have a webinar focused on how to conduct great discovery and how that leads to more frictionless sales. So let's go ahead and get into what we're talking about today. So the main theme of what we're going to be discussing today is the fact that discovery is an art form. And if you know what the techniques are and you know how to practice them, you can become a master at this craft. One of the things you'll notice when you're exceptionally good at discovery is you can create almost a gravitational like pull towards your end goals, and it'll really help you accomplish what you're seeking to accomplish in each meeting you go into. So let's discuss what the framework of this webinar is going to be so you understand how you're going to build up these skills. The first thing we're going to focus on is our approach. And what I mean by approach is we're going to focus on two distinct ways that we see people conduct business. The first is this ask, listen, understand first style approach. And the next is this show up and throw up style approach, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. From there, we're going to go ahead and talk about why it's important to frame out your discussions around topic areas and why you need to understand some clear things that you want to pull out of those topic areas if you're going to conduct discovery. Next, we're going to spend some time talking about how you actually create things like menu questions and examples to educate the person you're speaking with and to create a more dynamic conversation. Then we're going to talk about the idea of objections and why bringing them out early in a conversation is often a much better strategy than letting the elephant in the room sit there and stay quiet all the way up until the end of the meeting. And then finally, we're going to discuss this mindset thing around the fact that you're actually selling ideas and solutions that impact people's lives. You're not just selling numbers on a spreadsheet. Over the years of working with sellers, two distinct approaches have started to show up. The first approach is the show up and throw up style approach. And this is whenever a seller shows up to meet a prospect, they have a long slide sheet in tow, and then they start off the meeting by going over their slides, talking about how great their product or service is and why it's a fit for that company before they know anything about the company. And what this often leads to is a lot of great information going towards the direction of the client. But what you'll see is typically the way these meetings end is with the client saying, you know what? That was a lot of great, very interesting information. Let me get with my team and then I'll get back to you. And that's typically where it ends. The other approach, and we've seen this be much more successful with all the sellers we've worked with, is the ask, listen, and understand first approach that's designed to build rapport and then start selling. And the way this approach is different is instead of starting with a slideshow about you, you make the entire meeting, particularly the beginning of the meeting, all about them. So when you're meeting with a client and you start by asking what their goals are, what their concerns are, what are some of the problems that come up frequently and how do they address them? By the time you get to the point where you're starting to sell your product or service, you've done two things. One, you show the person across from you that you actually care and that now you truly understand their business. The second thing you do is you develop your own understanding internally of how you can actually pivot some of the talking points you may use on your product or service to be much more effective and much more enticing for the person you're meeting with. So not only are you building a shared understanding around what their needs, goals, and concerns are, you're able to better tailor this understanding towards your products and services so you can make it really clear and apparent to them that you are the right fit and you're the correct solution. And this more often than not leads to better results than that show up and throw up method. So whenever you're having your meetings, start with the mindset that you're going to ask, listen, and understand first, and then you can grow out and build from there. So we've established that we likely want to take an ask, listen, understand first approach, because that's typically where you're going to see the most value and the most reciprocation whenever it comes to the clients you're speaking with. Let's go ahead and talk about how you can actually create those kinds of conversations in a meaningful way. So it's going to consist of three things when you're trying to do this. First, your end goal. Next, your topic areas. And then finally, knowing whenever you figured out what you need to figure out within those topic areas. So let's discuss. First is your end goal. If you don't know where you're going, it's going to be mighty hard to get there. So understand what it is you're trying to get out of that conversation. Maybe you're trying to set up a follow-up conversation and expand the audience to extra decision makers. Maybe you're trying to get them some education and invite them to a training session. Or maybe you're just trying to sell your product or service in that meeting itself. Whatever the end goal is, you need to identify it and understand what it takes to actually get there. Now, once you understand what your end goal is and what it's likely going to take to get there, establish the topics that you need to discuss that'll facilitate getting to that end goal. So if I'm at a car dealership and my goal is to sell a car, I'm going to want to discuss 3 key topics. First, what's your price range so I understand what cars are available to you? Next, what kind of utility are you looking to get out of your car? Are you looking to get high gas mileage, great performance whenever you push down the gas? Are you looking to get something that can tow a lot? Or do you have a large family? Or are you looking for something like a minivan? Once I understand the utility, then I'll want to get into discussions about maybe safety. Maybe safety features are going to be a really big topic for us. So I'll go ahead and get into that. And then once I get an understanding of the price point, the utility you're looking for, and the safety features, now I can make an informed recommendation. And you're going to trust my recommendation much more because you know I understand your needs and what you're trying to do. And then finally, whenever it comes to those topics themselves, know when enough is enough. We need to know what it is we're trying to pull out of each topic area for us to help facilitate better decision making by the client. And if you understand when enough is enough in each topic, that'll give you the cues you need to be able to move from one topic to the next and feel like you got enough information, but you're not actually badgering people and just diving down into these topics for the sake of it. So establish those 3 things in the beginning of meetings, and that's really going to help you with your ask, listen, understand first approach. So we know we want to ask good conversational questions within different topic areas to build that rapport. Well, how do we do that? What's the most effective way to do it? First things first, we should be asking open-ended questions. And the reason why we want to ask an open-ended question versus a closed-ended is it facilitates better conversation and it creates less pressure that feels like you're trying to sell somebody while you're having that conversation. So let's talk about why. So whenever you ask these binary yes, no, do you want to buy my widget? Yes, no, would you use this style questions? What you're doing is one, you're limiting the response you get from somebody. They can't give you a longer explanation because you simply looked for a yes, no binary, and all they can do is say, I approve or disapprove of the question you asked me or the statement you just made. When you ask an open-ended question, that invites them to share their opinions and their thoughts with you in a longer, more broad way. And by doing this, you'll facilitate better conversations and you'll learn a lot more from the prospect in the process. The second thing it does is it creates a lot of selling pressure when you're constantly asking yes, no questions. And this is what creates discomfort in these conversations. So if you're not asking these yes, no questions and you're sticking with, hey, describe to me or tell me more about those kind of setups for questions, you're going to notice there's a lot less pressure. So your client's going to be a lot more comfortable with these conversations. And you're going to notice better developed answers in the process. So using open-ended questions is important. The thing I want to touch on, though, is asking open-ended questions alone often isn't enough. Typically, what we found is many prospects or potential clients simply don't have a firm enough understanding of the actual thing you're discussing to be able to make informed decisions or to give you great answers. And typically, what you see whenever this happens is people start to shut down on you a little bit and they give you one sentence answers in return. And this is when you can realize, you know what? They may be missing something here. And this is where the role of examples and menu questions really come in. So examples are important because it helps somebody visualize what's actually going down and how a specific product or service might be useful in facilitating their end goals. So if you're thinking about the example of the auto dealership, maybe it would sound something like, you know, Tom, it's really great that you came in here today. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And one of the things that we're often focused on whenever we're having conversations with people is gas mileage. And I was actually talking with somebody last week, a guy named Bob, and he said the reason why he bought the vehicle he bought is because he goes on long road trips with his family. And if he bought a vehicle that was less gas efficient, he'd find himself going on these road trips less frequently. And because this is important for his family, he wanted to ensure he got something with great gas mileage so he could more spontaneously take his family out and show them great adventures that they want to go on. So by using this example, now I've given somebody the ability to visualize what it's like to use this vehicle, and they understand the value now in having a better gas mileage because I help them visualize that. The next thing we can focus on are things like menu questions. And going back to that auto dealership example, let's discuss how I might ask a menu question to develop an understanding of what somebody wants while giving them some information that educates them on what might be important for them. So it might sound something like, Tom, I'm really glad you came in here today. And typically, when people are trying to purchase a vehicle here, they're doing it for one of three reasons. One, they're looking for something that'll facilitate taking their family everywhere safely and ensuring they can take long trips together. The second thing is they might be looking for a really high performance vehicle that can get from 0 to 60 in a few seconds and really pins them back against the seat, makes driving exciting. And then the third thing we often see is people are looking for a vehicle that can tow or it can carry large loads because they do a lot of heavy construction work, or something that requires a lot of towing, lifting, things like that. So whenever it comes to the vehicle you're looking for, I'm curious what your priorities are. So by asking a menu question like this, what it does is it allows me to cast a very wide net. So I can see what they might be interested in, and I can get better bites on what might be a better fit for them. But it also educates them on what the actual purposes are for these vehicles so they can understand what they might be doing, what they might be needing, and it'll help to guide them to a better decision point as well. So if you find that you're having conversations with people and open-ended questions just aren't cutting it, maybe think of some examples you might want to bring into it, as well as some menu questions you can use to help develop their understanding and give them a better thing to respond to. Whenever it comes to objections, early and often is much better than late or never. And here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes, people know that there's common objections that come up whenever they're trying to sell a particular product or service within an industry. And instead of being proactive and taking that bull by the horns, what people often do is they just pretend that these objections don't exist and they hope they don't come up. And so what happens is at the end of the meetings in the last few minutes, you start hearing those objections, or even worse, you hear no objections at all. And what this looks like is either you're trying to overcome these objections with the last few minutes you have, and that's really difficult to do, or they just tell you, hey, this is interesting. We'll get back with our team and we'll let you know. And then you don't hear from them again. Now, one of the ways you can avoid this common problem we see is by bringing up objections early and often in the conversation. If you know that there's maybe two or three things that are going to come up in that conversation that'll be negatives that are on the prospect's mind, whether you bring them up or not, it's best to proactively bring them up first, control the narrative of what that objection looks like and how it can be overcome, and then have that conversation with them. If you can do that early on in your meeting flow, what you can typically see is that you can overcome these objections in the first 10 to 20 minutes of the conversation. And that leaves the back half of the conversation for you to explain to them why your product or service is the right fit to help them accomplish their goals. If you don't do it this way, you'll run into that little bit of a late or never type situation at the end. And that's really difficult to overcome. And you're not giving yourself a fair chance. To end this conversation, let's actually discuss what we're trying to accomplish with this ask, listen, understand first approach. We really want to build this shared understanding. And the reason why is not only do we want the prospect to know that we understand and we care about what their needs and their goals are, is we want to be able to tailor why our particular solution is the right fit for them. Remember, we're not just selling products and services on a spreadsheet. That's not what we're doing. We're selling things that actually change people's lives in some tangible way. And if you can think through how somebody's life or somebody's business is going to be impacted in a way that you can create a narrative around and they can visually understand, you're going to be in a much better position for them to actually make that buying decision than if you're just trying to sell some product or service a little bit detached from their day-to-day workflows. So think through as you're having this conversation with them and you're learning about their needs, their goals, and their objectives, how is this going to impact their lives? And if you have a narrative around somebody who's like them, who had similar problems, similar objectives, and you can tell them what they did and how it turned out for them, you're helping them visualize what the future with you in it actually looks like. So as you're working with somebody, think through some of the people you've worked with in the past in similar situations and try to construct a narrative that consists of a problem they had so they can understand what it's like to be in that situation. Tell them about the decision they made so they can see, you know what, if I had that problem, that decision would actually make sense. And then at the end, talk about the results they got. so they can hear the clear what's in it for me if I go through the trouble of implementing your product or service. Because let's be honest, doing anything is a lot harder to do than doing nothing. So you have to make it clear to them that if they have problems, you've got solutions that'll impact their overall end results. We've covered a lot of ground here today, so let's go ahead and recap. First off, know what you want whenever you show up to a meeting and know what your objective is. The next thing is come with an ask, listen, and understand first mindset and agenda. Whenever you're creating that agenda, you're going to want to think through what are the critical topics we get into and what are some good open-ended questions I can ask that'll open up those discussions and facilitate better understanding from both parties. Next, have some good examples in mind, as well as maybe a couple menu questions that can facilitate better conversations if you can see you need to educate the prospect a little bit more on these particular topics. Bring out objections early and often whenever you know that they're common and they're likely in the prospect's mind to begin with. And then finally, and probably most importantly, know that you're actually selling products, services, and solutions that impact people's lives. You're not just selling numbers on a spreadsheet. You're not just selling some generic idea. You're selling something that's actually going to impact behavior, and it's going to change the way people live their day-to-day lives, and know how to vocalize that. It's really easy to talk about these topics and listen to them and think they make sense, but implementation is a much different thing, and we know that. So if you're struggling with how you'd actually implement this style of an approach and how you train yourself or your team to conduct it, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to help out. When you reach out, we'd offer a complimentary free book on our sales methodology so you can make an informed decision if this is the right fit for you. And if you'd like to book a demo with your team to actually see what our coaching method looks like in practice, please reach out and let us know at salesgym.com. In the meantime, if you just like to get more information and take some tips and tricks, you can jump on LinkedIn or YouTube and find us there. And we're constantly posting new information that's useful and immediately applicable for sales managers and sellers in general. It's been great having you here. Thank you for staying with me through the end of this webinar. If you have any questions, reach out to me at dnr@salesgym.com or find me on LinkedIn. Have a great day, and I'll catch you later.